Hello and welcome to the Awake and Empowered Radio. I'm Jeffrey Jackson. With me is Ethan Fox, spiritual teacher and visionary behind the Awake and Empowered Expo happening October 11th through the 13th, 2013 in Detroit, Michigan. We're very fortunate today to be joined by AJ Deeds. AJ is a sought-after speaker, facilitator, researcher, and catalyst for change for Fortune 500 companies, as well as family-held businesses. AJ is also co-founder of Loving Works LLC, found at mylovingworks.com, and he'll be speaking at the expo on electromagnetic frequencies. AJ, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Let's start into your summary. Could you give me a quick background for those that are listening, of basically how you came about to doing what you're doing?
Oh, great. Well, I started Loving Works actually in the mid-'90s, more as a pastime and an interest where I could get involved with things that were off the beaten path, shall we say. But about 3 years ago, I formulated and formalized the company, and then we've been providing services, health and wellness services to folks throughout the United States.
Okay. And what will you be covering at the Awake and Empowered Expo?
We're focused this talk on electromagnetic fields. So we'll be helping people understand some of the fundamentals, some of the challenges, the controversies, and then what comes next.
And also with Loving Works, could you tell me a little bit about how that company got started and what exactly it entails or what you deal with?
Sure. Loving Works, our vision is to help each other to grow in body, heart, mind, and spirit. And so with that, we want to find methods and tools, products, experiences that not only we develop, but also others develop and share that so that we can make an impact and help people to achieve greater balance in their lives across those multiple different dimensions of who we are as human beings. Yeah. So with that, we primarily are focused on health and wellness because our association with Dr. Kyle Morgan, she's an alternative medicine DO, an osteopath out of Ann Arbor, and an inventor as well. So we're very excited about her work, and that has been a real catalyst and a real source for inspiration as well as products and experiences.
So what kind of inventions is she working on?
Well, Dr. Carl has some very interesting healing modalities that bring people from all around the world to see her. She has patients from Europe to Taiwan and all across North America. So she does a lot of energy work. She works with folks with cancer diagnoses, with Lyme, with things that are very difficult to either get your hands on or to make progress against. And so one of the things I so love about her healing center, her health clinic, she works as a family practitioner, is people come in who are obviously in a great deal of pain and concern and worry and anxiety over their health, and they walk out feeling lighter, a light step in their footstep, even smiling or laughing because, they may come in and see her, I've got this terrible diagnosis of this terrible cancer. And Dr. Carl's like, we can take care of that. So the confidence and the outcomes that she's able to achieve are wonderful.
And these are people that are seeking something outside the normal medical care for whatever reason. Would that be correct?
Well, there's some of those folks who are looking for preventive. Okay. And they're also interested in not following the typical slice, dice, radiate, or medicate model. Yeah. But of course, the Western model has some value, and Dr. Kyle is a licensed osteopath, so she has a wide range of options at her fingertips. But she's primarily someone who has developed some different techniques that can help people regardless of their circumstance. We were talking before we started the interview, and you said you came from a more of a somewhat engineering background, thinking mind, analytical background, but you're able to, much like Dr. Morgan, you're able to kind of put that into a 360-degree modality for the numbers people as well as the creative people, correct? Well, that's a good point. My background is more technical, but my interests are more open, I guess. Yeah. So, anyone who thinks that we've invented everything or we've discovered everything is missing that great inspiration of what comes next. Obviously, we want to have open minds, but not so open that our brains fall out. So, we move forward and we validate. Yeah. So we move forward with opportunity, but we validate with specifics and with facts.
Yeah.
So, my background, I'm an industrial and systems engineer. I've got an MBA in marketing from the University of Michigan. I've taught at the business school at Michigan as an adjunct professor. And I've helped companies around the world to improve their processes, to improve how people work together, to build teams, and to build skills.
Yep.
And so that's been my technical background. And so I understand the world of work and the world of science and physics. And yet at the same time, we have to be open to new opportunities and new solutions, because what we're currently doing is what we're currently getting.
Right.
And what we currently have is insufficient for us to make sure that we support our 7 generations going forward. So there's a lot of improvements and changes that need to come in how we live, so that we're not living on the backs of our future generations.
There seems to be more people like you coming to the forefront of becoming more conscious and bringing that harmony out, which is nice to see. So thanks. As far as, let's see, tell us some solutions that Dr. Morgan and yourself have developed for electromagnetic frequencies and combating them.
Well, the whole reason I got focused primarily on electromagnetic fields had to do with Dr. Kyle herself.
Yeah.
She's had her own journey over the last 3.5 years of a chronic health condition that she's been working on. And when the utility companies put a smart meter on the house in August last year, she saw an immediate negative health effect. Her blood pressure went up, heart rate went up, couldn't sleep. And so we needed to get some type of resolution around that. She had been aware of a company out of Canada that had been around 18, 20 years, and she had sent patients, but had never talked with the developer and the owner there. So we investigated that, found a resolution to that specific condition, and she saw immediate relief. So that stimulated for me the interest in this area, because really electromagnetic fields are similar, or just another dimension of toxicity.
Yes.
So all of us understand food toxicity, right?
Yes.
So herbicides and pesticides, we understand pathogens, too much bacteria or the wrong type, and we can get ill. We also understand heavy metal or man-made or structural toxicity, inorganic.
Right.
So the organic, the pathogens, inorganic, the heavy metals and plastics and these types of things that interrupt our processes in our body, endocrine system, et cetera. So we may not also, some of us may recognize, but not everyone recognizes there's a third type of toxicity, and that's toxic relationships. And Dr. Kyle has seen in some of her patients that the source of their malady, the source of their diagnosis is really in the nexus of a toxic relationship. And until they can either change that or eliminate that relationship, they still have created an environment of illness because that toxicity is poisoning them.
Yeah.
And then this other phase that we've been exploring since August is the electromagnetic toxicity and how that affects certain people, not others, and what are some things we can do about it.
Yeah. This seems to be a somewhat new area as far as research is concerned, because there's not the studies are coming to the forefront, but it's not something that's widely studied for the amount of smart meters that are going out. There's no really long-term human studies, and that's what I'm concerned about. So I like the term you used, another dimension of toxicity. I think that's a dangerous part too, because it's an invisible dimension of toxicity.
Right. We can't these electro disturbances in the earth, geopathic stress, or those sources of energy that comes from human-made devices. We can't see them. We can't smell them. And then we start having some insomnia, or we start having headaches or vertigo or tinnitus ringing in the ears. And we're just not sure where it comes from. Well, the job is tough, or we're overly stressed. So we can't really put our finger on it. And then when we go to certainly traditional practitioners or health practitioners, they can't quite place us. They have 120 boxes, and we're not quite fitting in any of those boxes, and really a pill doesn't do it. So, there's a lot of suffering that's going on, and more that's coming to the forefront.
Yeah. Speaking of back to the EMFs again, why do you think some people experience EMF related conditions more intensely than other people? Is there a rhyme or reason to that?
Well, there's a lot yet to be discovered in this area.
Yeah.
Certainly, all of us as human beings are unique, and we carry with us a unique profile that we come here to as a part of our journey here, but also our environment impacts us significantly. So some people, love broccoli, others don't. Some people can do dairy, others can't. Some people love the outdoors, others, don't enjoy the cold.
Yeah,
so there's a great deal of variety that occurs both in our physical makeup or our DNA or where our strengths and weaknesses are as a physical being, but then there's also impacts that we've had. Like for myself, I had a condition of over the threshold, over the chart arsenic. Oh. And so when I first met Dr. Kyle, I had a scar that had gotten thick and dark colored. And, if I looked at it on my arm, and it was from a car accident in my early 20s, and I would look at it in the mirror and I'd say, if I ignore that, maybe it'll just go away. And 3 years later, it hadn't. And then when I met Dr. Kyle, she took one look and said, oh, we can take care of that for you. And I said, well, what is it? Oh, it doesn't matter what it is. She says, we'll take care of it. And so I did a urine toxin test, found that I was carrying excessive amounts of arsenic, and was likely from shallow wells of a home I had up in Fenton. Because healthcare practitioners know Fenton, Michigan has a serious arsenic problem. Where'd it come from? Cement factories 120 years ago.
Wow.
Where they would just, it was common practice to dump stuff, and the water has never really recovered.
Yeah.
So, in my case, I was then exposed in a localized environmental impact that then was affecting my health. So coming back to EMFs, people are exposed for different reasons and for different circumstances, not only their physical or DNA composition of where their strengths and weaknesses, but also their environment where they may have exposure. Some may work in hospitals, some may work in factories with a lot of motors. Yeah. Others may spend time in front of, electrically powered devices. Right. Some carry their phones specifically in their pocket all the time. Others keep it at a distance. So, and then some people have a great way of degaussing or of grounding themselves. They spend more time outdoors. Others do not. Right. So all of these variables come together and help us to, although not clearly understand, but certainly we could appreciate that there's a great deal of variability, whereas some people are sensitive now or have reached a point of a threshold where now they're getting other kinds of responses where the others doesn't seem to affect them at all.
Would you consider yourself electrosensitive?
No, I'm kind of thick sometimes. So I've met plenty of folks who are, and we see a series of conditions or health symptoms that are surrounded or common for folks who are exposed to excessive electromagnetic fields or for example, one of the first things that hits is insomnia, because EMF, if you think of EMF as like you're a cup, and you can have so much as your cup fills up with more and more electromagnetic energy, if you're able to reduce that through some other activities, being outdoors, grounding, other things, then you've got this flow of ebb and flow of a certain amount of energy. But if you fill up and reach a certain threshold, then even if you remove the source of that electromagnetic field, you've now surpassed a threshold and you're not going back. It's like a trap door. And so people who are electrosensitive will find that they may start experiencing insomnia for no reason that they can put a finger on, or they might blame that on stress, but it's likely not. Yeah. And then they might start getting headaches or vertigo or ringing in the ears or feelings of anxiety. Then that may progress into more circulatory issues, with heart palpitations or with, increased heart rates, or blood pressure may go up. And then the next thing that people will see as you get more chronically in this condition is it interrupts the ability for the body to pull in nutrients, vitamins and minerals. And as soon as you start on that cascade, then now you have all kinds of other health issues, not because of the EMFs, but because those created a barrier to your absorption, and then that created these other problems. Wow. So it can be quite involved. And once you remove or are able to reduce your exposure to EMFs, you still have the health issue if you've reached that threshold. So we like to describe it like, for example, you're driving your car. It's in the winter. You hit an icy spot. You fall off the road and you hit a tree and you crash and you break your leg. Yeah. So removing and doing something about the EMF exposure is fixing the car. If you pass the threshold, you still have a broken leg. Right. So you have to get the broken leg fixed in addition to repairing the car. And this is why when people look for resources and solutions to EMF exposure, their expectation is, well, as soon as I take care of it, I should feel better. And depending on where they are, they may not feel any different any differently at all.
I have to say I've done a lot of research on EMF, and that's some of the best explanation and distilled information I've ever heard on that subject.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the other things we're going to talk about in the presentation or in the talk at the event that you will definitely want to hear, because you'll hear things you will not hear anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that is, we'll capture the primary positions of the major camps, as well as introduce some new ideas that I will predict that very few people in the audience will have come across.
Interesting.
So briefly, there's two primary camps in the area of the science behind exposure to electromagnetic fields, that kind of radiation. Mm-hmm. And that is that, electromagnetism is merely an understanding of the vibration or the frequency of energy. Okay. And it ranges from really strong ionizing radiation, which is up in the space, nuclear or gamma rays, and then X-rays and a little bit of ultraviolet. Those are ionizing, where they can literally destroy cells and cause cancer. And there's no argument with that. Everybody understands that. Too much exposure to X-rays, et cetera, it's not good. But then once you get past that and you move down the spectrum from visible light and then into infrared and then microwave and then radio waves, TV and our cell phones. The traditional position is that there is merely a issue of too much energy that could create a heating effect. Mm. And you have to get a lot of energy to get heated. So, for example, don't put your head in the microwave, turn on 2 minutes, because you'll likely see a very direct heating effect. Yeah. Don't stay under the infrared lamp too long. You'll get a heating effect. So that's what the traditional folks feel is a heating effect. And there might be some micro-induced currents if you're close to really strong fields, because our bodies are really electromechanical or electrochemical. In the 3D we are. Yeah. But we also carry other energy as well, photon energy, light energy, biophotons, etc. But we'll come back to that. So the traditional camp says if it's non-ionizing, as long as you don't have a heating effect, everything's fine. Now, they do recognize that there's thresholds of where you shouldn't be exposed. And right now, some of the thresholds are about 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. So there's a standard that the government, the NIOSH, and OSHA, and some of the safety organizations will set for both workplace and for being in the home. But there's a second group. And they're also made of experts. That first group has PhDs and MDs and DOs and scientists, and experts. And this is their position. And that's the position of the industry. It's a position of the utility industry, the power generating industry, and the cell phone industry. And a lot of medical practitioners as well. But there's also a series of MDs, DOs, scientists, PhDs, and other experts who are recognizing that, well, as we see more and more research that's being performed, we're actually seeing where the threshold where there's a biological or pathological effect on the body is much, much lower than 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. It's almost as if you had a speed limit of 500 miles per hour on the freeway and nobody's breaking the law because it's so far above any vehicle. Right. So 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared as a measure of power, how much exposure. So, so the question is, what's your specific absorption rate? And so an absorption rate is how strong is the signal, how close are you to it, and how long is it there? Right. So if you put your cell phone in your pocket and you carry it for 10 or 12 hours a day, that's a lot of time. It has a significant signal, especially when it brings in a call or transfers data, and then it's real close to you. But if it's farther away, like your television set, sure, that's putting off EMS, but you're 10 feet away, you're watching it. It's not as much of a concern. Well, for those watching 10 hours a day, perhaps you want to pay a little better attention. So there's two groups. One is where's the standard? And the focus is on the amount of power, the amount of specific absorption rate, the SAR. There's a third group, very small group, and the inventor of the products that we use, that Dr. Kyle used to help herself, and the ones that we're interested in, and we're doing some research. In fact, we're just working now with a major university to set up a significant research project on infrasound and wind turbines. So there's a third group that says it's not so much the amount of power over a unit of time or a unit of body, but rather it's the specific frequency of that power. And so while this electromagnetic spectrum has a far range of frequency, from the highest frequencies in ionic or ionizing radiation all the way down to the low radio frequency and extremely low. Because you see what happens is that all of us are exposed to electromagnetic field energy every single day of our lives. It's called the Schumann frequency, or it's the Earth's natural frequency.
Yes.
Now, it's not from a spiritual standpoint, it's a physiological effect.
Right.
It basically is a standing wave due to lightning that strikes over 200 times a minute somewhere on the Earth, and it stimulates the electrons in the atmosphere between the surface of the Earth and the ionosphere, and it creates this standing wave. So we're born, we live, we thrive, we die, all in a life cycle. All living things on the surface of the Earth experience primarily 7 to 8 hertz, hertz being a measure of frequency per second, cycles per second. So our bodies are attuned to live within a 6 to 9 range, 6 to 9 hertz range. 7 to 8 is the sweet spot. What happens is that all of these electronic devices we're exposed to, cell phones, laptops, microwaves, they operate at these different frequencies, 1.2 gigahertz, radio frequency, microwave, infrared, but all of them also output an extremely low frequency around 9.5, 10.5, 11, 12, 13. And it's that extremely low frequency that is real close to our ideal, that when we get too much of that, it exposes and resonates us up to where now our own energy biofield can be resonating, instead of 6 to 9, maybe 9.5 or 10.5 or 11. And when we get into that area, that's when people are ill, or they have different kinds of medical problems or diagnoses, and we evaluate them, we find that their energy field has become elevated. So it's correlated at this point. So one of the things I'm working with this in the beginnings of this major university is to identify, can we gauge this with the existing instrumentation? Because right now, the only way to detect it is using dowser rods.
Yeah.
And dowser rods, not everybody really agrees are scientific. So that's a long discussion of a number of things. But those are the three camps.
Okay.
There's a traditional camp that does 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared.
Yeah.
That's acceptable. Anything below ionizing, it's only a heating effect. But we recognize too much energy is not good, so we set the standard. There's a second group that says, no, that standard's way too high. It should be down to 1/10 of a microwatt per centimeter squared or less.
Yeah.
And officials in the cell phone industry are on record as saying, if the standard switch to 1/10 of a microwatt, it's the end of the cell phone industry as we know it. So that's part of the big controversy and argument.
Yeah. That's one of the concerns I have, is when an industry, your group A, when an industry sets the standards, they have a vested interest because they're selling a product, much like the cell phone industry. So I'm concerned about that when they put that standard at 1,000, and then they find out that, well, it could be a lot less than that. That's going to cause health problems.
The challenge that when you think about people in the industry, they're people. They wake up each day. They don't wake up thinking, who am I going to mess up today?
Right.
They think about, how am I going to do my job well? How am I going to contribute? So they also are intending to do things in a good way. They have maybe a different point of view as people in the second group.
Yeah.
And so we have to be careful that when we work with each other, that we don't look at one group and say, well, you're only vested in your own interest. All of us benefit from this technology. All of us use cell phones and computers, and all of us use electricity. So, the idea that we would stop doing that and demonstrate that we could live life without those benefits and tools is very, very difficult for people to imagine. So for us to reject the source of the power, even though we use the power, that's, a different position that we have to think about ourselves. So what's better is, can we find ways that where the technology can help us, or that we can at least make different choices to minimize the impact? Because unless we're going to give up the use of the power and all the benefits that it brings, it has these downsides. And this is why the wind turbine industry is getting so much of a boost, even though there's more and more people who are really feeling this is terrible, because when it comes to your neighborhood, we read in the paper, what are the effects that they start getting? Insomnia, tinnitus, anxiety, ringing in the ears, coldness at the tips of the fingers and toes, heart palpitations, all of the things that we would expect to see with excessive exposure to low EMFs. Now, the argument there in the wind turbine industry is that it has to do with infrasound. It's the sound of the wind turbine. Well, you go right next to this thing, you can hear birds singing. So the people who are promoting it are saying, what's the problem? It's not even as loud as a car going by. So there's not enough energy that wattage to even create a pathological effect. But we've been able to gauge up to a quarter of a mile away this extremely low frequency, 10.5 hertz, 11, 12 hertz, that's invisible, silent, can't measure it with other instrumentation. And that's just doses people when they're in those wind farms. So I'm not surprised that they have these health issues. They're a reflection of extremely low EMF, extremely low frequency EMFs, which is the exact same thing as infrasound. Infrasound is sound below 20 hertz. ELF EMFs are 9.5 to 15. So we're talking about the same kind of energy and the same kind of effect, but no one's really studying that because so far, the only thing that detects that are dowser rods.
Theoretically, is it not possible to produce technology that would have the right frequency, if we put our mind to it, that would either enhance our health or at least not adversely affected like current electromagnetic fields? Such as, could we not produce a cellular network or something similar that would not cause these adverse effects?
I totally agree with you, Ethan, that there has to be a technological solution because none of us are willing to give up the benefits that power brings. But it has these downsides, these costs. And the costs are borne by a small percentage of people, by our neighbors who are affected by this. And these things are going to continue to show up in all of our backyards. The wind towers, the wind turbines are coming as an alternative because coal and coal-fired plants have problems. And we believe that there are already solutions out there. And this one company in Canada we're working with, we're very interested in, and that's why we're studying their materials closely in line with a major university, is because it represents a different approach. Most people look at blocking or shielding as the solution. And in fact, there's there's an area in West Virginia where there's a giant telescope, and the government has shut off all radio frequency transmissions in that area. And so people who have electrosensitivity are flocking there, but there's no jobs. And the locals are like, these people need to go away because what few service jobs there are there for us. You know, people feel more comfortable. They're not exposed to the energy, but not all of us can live in that, 500 square mile area or whatever it is in West Virginia. And we can't shield ourselves because electromagnetism is one of the 4 fundamental forces on the planet. You have gravity, you have the 2 different nuclear energies, this weak and strong nuclear energy, nuclear force, and then you have electromagnetism. And plus we're living in a standing wave our whole lives. So what is a smarter solution is to harmonize some of these frequencies to bring it down into an area that we are designed to live within. And that's what this technology does out of Canada. The challenge is improving it. That's the challenge. And that's what we're working on.
I know when they discovered the Schumann resonance, they did some experiments where they put some people underground and they had them live underground for, I think it was 30 days or something like that. And to see, it was a lead encampment and they were sealed in there to see what kind of effects they were having on them. But what are your thoughts on the mats or the grounded mats that people sleep on that try to reharmonize that 6 to 9 megahertz?
Well, there's a number of tools out there, and people have to find out what works for them.
Okay.
That's really the best thing. I've worked with folks who have put up different types of fabric on their walls to shield them, even put aluminum foil on the back of their brick houses. Yeah. And their neighbors are looking at them and wondering, well, you're wearing the tin foil hat as well. So it can be a little embarrassing, but who cares? I mean, you're experiencing the negative effect and you're looking for a solution. The challenge is with so many different companies offering so many different things, and the claims all seem to sound the same. Yes, ours works. No, ours works. No, ours works better. So that's a challenge. So we're going to look at some criteria that people can use to evaluate what's working for them so they can make better choices. I certainly have found something, and Dr. Kyle has found something that's worked for her and worked for us and worked for her patients, but it's not the only solution out there. I think the key thing, though, is that we need to move away from the idea of shielding and blocking and hiding, because all that really does is it just projects that energy that's coming into our home or our space, and it sends it on to somebody else. And so we're not really helping if all we're saying, well, I'm fine, but I don't care about the rest of you all. Right. That's not a real good community space to be in. Right. What's better is that if we find a way to harmonize this, so no matter what we encounter, then we're in good shape. Yeah. We're living in the the sweet spot.
Yeah. And what you mentioned too, and you said it's perhaps embarrassing to put that stuff on the outside of your house. I think we need information like you're giving and getting out there. It's to start the conversation and keep it going, not even start the conversation, but to keep it going so it's not embarrassing anymore. So you can have this conversation with your neighbor, or it's basically like if everyone's smoking, it's not embarrassing to put down the cigarette. It's healthy and it's smart.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes from education.
Yes.
Right now there's a big focus on what I would call the 3D aspects of EMF. Mm-hmm. So it's looking at the sources of electricity. It's looking at, is it dirty electricity? Is it not dirty electricity? What's the pulse? How much energy? Even those who are well-intended and trying to help people or help themselves if they've passed a threshold, the major focus is on the amount of exposure to power, to wattage. Mm-hmm. And there's no attention being paid, limited attention to being paid to the frequency of it. Right. There's some research now that's coming out that's focusing on ELF, or extremely low frequency energy, because the amount of power that generates is very low. And in many cases, not even enough to trigger a meter. Wow. So if you walk around and you've got a meter that's gauging extremely low frequency from 0 to 30 hertz, for example, and you walk in your backyard or you walk down your sidewalk and you go over a crack and the needle doesn't move, you've just stepped over geopathic stress, but your needle is not sensitive enough to pick it up. So if you're using the instrumentation as your sole evidence of the existence of the energy, you've missed it. Versus if I walk over that with a pair of dowser rods, I can show you 10.5 hertz are coming out of every single crack in your sidewalk, your driveway, your foundation. Wow. And if that crack happens to be in your basement, positioned underneath your bed, you're being dosed as long as you're lying in your bed every day with 10.5 hertz. So that close resonated electro disturbances from the earth, it's natural, but it does exist. You got to protect yourself from that. And then you wonder why after, it could be a couple of years for some people, could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It's hard to say. Yeah. The smart meters tend to push people over the edge. So obviously there's some strength there that maybe we're not getting the full story on.
Yeah. I personally have a lot of EMF mitigation technology in the house. I sleep on a grounded sheet that's got a grounding rod in the backyard and so on. But what do you personally use to mitigate electromagnetic stress?
Well, we're associated with a company out of Canada I mentioned. Their name is Eradicator Technologies. And because Loving Works is a distributor as well as a maker of things, we're distributing that technology. So that's our vested interest because we found a solution. As I mentioned, our vision is to help each other to grow in body, heart, mind, and spirit. And so when we find somebody else's thing that works great, we're all about promoting that. So that's why I'm always open to everybody's thing until they prove otherwise. So that's why I keep a curiosity, and some of the wildest stuff, that seems like, oh, that can't be true. And then when you look into it, of course, you do want to look into it and you do want to ask some pointed questions, which are all valid and helpful to ascertain stuff that's helpful versus stuff that's kind of, well, shall we say, someone's wishing that it's going to do its job. So yeah, we focus on these technologies because they're complete in their resolution. There's a solution for when you're outside of your home, when you're in your home, and then to reduce the amount of generation. So harmonizing, electrical devices of all different types, and then also protecting from geopathic stress, and then just protecting yourself when you go.
What do you use for protecting when you go?
Well, Eradicator Technologies has a unique pendant. I know a lot of people have pendants. Yeah. There's a number of different technologies out there. Some are holographic. Some are quartz crystal. And those can add some value. The real question you want to ask anybody who's presenting you with a solution is, how long does it last? And does it get dirty? Right. And if it gets dirty, then how do you clean it? And can you clean it? So what Eradicator Technologies has demonstrated is they've been around about 20 years, over 100,000 customers, and their technology, their claim is that their stuff doesn't get dirty. And the other thing that's unique that they can prove is that it actually drains the resonated excess energy in the geopathic stress area back down to 6 to 9, and they have a way of demonstrating that. So that's been very interesting, and we've seen some results with that as well.
Yeah. And how are you testing these products to see that they're actually working?
That's a great question, Ethan. The company itself uses a Vega test. It uses Eagle test, a number of other resources. I've focused primarily on the Dowser rods. I've started using those over the last nearly 3/4 of a year, and I've had people say, "Wow, you're really good with those. How many years have you been doing Dowser rods?" It's like, well, I don't know, 6 months. But one of the things I have been able to do with the Dowser rods, because granted, Dowser rods are kind of in the woo-woo area, there's no question about it, is Dr. Kyle has a cold laser. So she uses that as part of her healing modalities. So this is a $13,000 piece of equipment. You can program frequencies into it. And so I have validated or calibrated these Dowser rods to show reproducibility of movement based on a frequency. So at 7 hertz, which is 7 to 8, the sweet spot, those Dowser rods are horizontal, or parallel, I should say. And then when they get to 10, they cross. And when they get to 13, they're practically perpendicular to one another. When we're at 60 hertz, they rotate back on themselves, back about 270 degrees. And I can get the same movement every time. So I have reproducibility. So as an engineer and someone who has a background in quality control and quality management, when you go to create a product or a part in a factory, where I have a lot of extensive experience in consulting work, you have to get a master gauge that sets the exact dimension. And then from there, you get the test gauge. And then that's what you test the product to make sure you have something within the range of variability that you're permitted for that blueprint, for that part. In the case of the Dowser rods, I know that this cold laser, indeed, if I plug in 7 hertz, it's outputting 7 hertz. If I plug in 12, it's outputting 12. And then when those Dowser rods rotate the exact same spot each time, I know I've calibrated a gauge. So then when I walk across the crack in the sidewalk in your front yard and it goes to this specific crossing, I can say, oh, that's 12 hertz. Yeah. Or that's 10 and a half. Or that's 14. Right. So that's how I've been able to validate and I've been able to test a lot of different things with that.
That's essential information, because I was the person just 2 weeks ago that was walking around my house with the EMF reader, watching the ping when I get by the light socket or the microwave. But ELF was completely, the low frequency was completely off my radar. So it's good to know that. I'm educating right now.
Well, we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly.
And I've been to, I was out in Toronto here in April at a major health and wellness show, and I sat in listening to some people talk about EMFs, and there were maybe 150 people in the audience, and you heard the stories of people who were in such difficulty, such terrible health conditions where they were confined to their home because of the electrosensitivity. It was driving them mad. They could not sleep. I mean, the suffering that they've experienced. And to think that one group of technical people say, well, it doesn't exist. Right. It's a nocebo effect, meaning that, we've heard of the placebo effect, where something that has no impact or no active ingredient creates a positive healing effect. That's a placebo. A nocebo is something that has no effect, no active ingredient, but creates a negative effect. Yeah. And so, but yet you hear of these folks with terrible conditions and terrible situations in their life. And some of the experts, the best they could say is, well, if the filtering technology, if the Stelzer, Miller filter doesn't work, if the material on the wall doesn't work, then you got to move. That's crazy. And that's not a solution. No. Because where do you move to? Where do we all move to? Right. We're living in the circuit now. When you drive down the freeway, you will see so many towers now. They pop up like mushrooms overnight. If you gauge that, I've been all along the major freeways in Ohio, Michigan, 3.5 miles is the farthest that they're apart. Anywhere from a half a mile to 3.5 miles, and they're getting much taller. Yeah. So, but again, the industry says, well, we measure it. It's just outputting microwaves and, there's no problem. Yeah. They're not measuring this ELF frequency. And that's the new information that we'll be talking about. And that's the space that holds the promise for a resolution for the folks who are working towards harmonizing to bring this side frequency or the side effect frequency and get it down into something that is natural for us. And we can get exposed to that energy all day long. 6 to 9 hertz, bring it on. That's when you go out in the woods or you go out in the field and you take your shoes off and you're grounded to the earth. You feel so good outdoors. Why is that? You're exposed to 7 hertz.
I can tell right away we're going to have you back for a part 2 because I have 100 questions that are popping up in my head, but I'm going to pass it to Ethan here.
Okay, so I'm sure you're familiar with earthing technology, right? Okay.
Sure.
What do you think about, you're familiar with Stetzer filters also, I'm sure, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the earthing technology does not use Stetzer filters or any kind of filtration, right?
Right.
So do you think that that is an adverse, people who are using them and plugging them into their ground plug, do you think that that's a negative because it's not actually being filtered, the dirty electricity from the wall that you're grounding into? Do you know what I mean?
Your question is, is a solution that's being presented, is it not doing as claimed? I mean, that's the bigger question, correct. Right? Because it's not just this specific application, but it's any application. Mm-hmm. Can it really help me? Mm-hmm. And the true answer to that is, what's the impact to the person who's seeking the solution? We want to think that there's only one solution, and that's the best one, and that's what everybody should have. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's true or not, because there's different effects that people experience, right? We're at different thresholds. Some of us may be much more sensitive to electrostatic energy than electromagnetism. I don't know if that's true, but they could be, because that's a different dimension of the same force. Electrostatic is when, the electrons aren't moving, but it has a potential. And then electromagnetic is when you've got moving electrons. Mm-hmm. So the answer is, I'm not sure how to answer that, other than people have to find out for themselves. And unfortunately, that sometimes takes some investment, where you try something and it doesn't quite work. But you have to also remember you're working on 2 levels of healing, or 2 levels of improvement. I mean, imagine this. Imagine you come home every day and you take out a teaspoon and you take out some bleach and you pour a teaspoon in it and you drink it. I mean, that doesn't make too much sense, does it? Why? Because we know bleach is a poison. But if you took just a teaspoon of it, or maybe say a quarter teaspoon, it wouldn't kill you, but it might make you sick. And over time, each day you take a quarter teaspoon, and finally someone says, "Oh, that's poison. You shouldn't be putting that bleach into your system." And you thought, smack your head. Here, I thought I was getting rid of some germs, because I wanted to kill it with the bleach, or whatever the reason is, right? I'm just making the story up. Right. Well, you stop taking the bleach, but now you still have that effect of that bleach for all that time. And so, who are we to know that whether or not the grounding is the right tool for somebody, or if the Stetzer filter, if the dirty electricity is what's creating the effect on this person, because we are different. We can't make claims that says, well, because we've learned about this ELF, extremely low frequency, the resonating. Now, we have seen people who've been ill, they're 100%, the ones we've tested, have elevated bioenergy fields. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have dowsers, you can't gauge it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's still more to learn. And so that's why I can't really answer that question.
Okay, that's good. What about nutritional ways to mitigate or protect against EMF? For example, I've read, and I take propolis every day, and I've read that propolis is good for inhibiting electromagnetic fields. And also bentonite clay, for example, is another one. What do you think about those, or do you have any other solutions?
I think for me, the nutritional aspect deals with that second piece. Mm-hmm. So my understanding of how the EMF poisoning or toxicity affects us is it impacts primarily our endocrine system. Mm-hmm. And then when our hormones are screwed up, that is, the hormones, of course, as we know, are really the supervisors of the body. Mm-hmm. They're the directors. They tell different parts what to do. I mean, our bodies are amazing factories. We take in elements and ingredients, we convert them, we strip them apart, we change molecules, we add molecules. We're building stuff, we're, recreating things, we're tearing stuff down, and then we're outputting energy and work. Work meaning just as a physics term of force. And so, when we look at the electromagnetic fields and that energy, the nutrition piece is so important, but I'm not as clear on where nutrition alone will give you the kind of barrier or protection from this physiological, energetic piece. Mm-hmm. To the extent that nutrition obviously also carries its own energy. And if you've got a missing gap in your constitution, and by taking a supplement, it brings that up to speed, well, then that would make sense. Mm-hmm.
I've read somewhere that the Schumann resonance frequency has increased to 12. Have you read anything about that or heard anything about that?
Okay, my understanding is that folks who have considered that the Earth's frequency is changing are speaking more on a spiritual standpoint, like the 100th monkey concept, where if just 100 monkeys suddenly start working on something, all monkeys know about it. So there's a sense that, and some of the experiments in Iran and other places where if enough yogis or strong spiritual people meditate, they can affect the impact in physical 3D space and time. And I'm sure that's true. By definition, though, that cannot be true, that the Schumann frequency has shifted, because the Schumann frequency is merely a physiological effect. It's a metric of a standing wave that's based on the diameter of the Earth. Now, it shifts a little bit based on whether you use the latitude or longitude. If you go through the poles, the Earth is not exactly a sphere, and so it still comes between 7 and 8. And the Schumann frequencies, there's actually harmonics. So the 7 to 8 is the base Schumann frequency, and then as you move up, there's 5 or 6 others. So when people say, well, no, it's shifted, they're really referring to, in my view, spiritual understanding and the elevation of human consciousness, which is a different thing than a 3D, physical, measurable phenomenon that exists on the planet.
Have you ever heard of the zapper, the little box that I've got one of them that you wear? It produces a Schumann frequency, similar to a Schumann frequency, but it also has several other components in it that mitigate electromagnetic fields. And by wearing it, you're constantly pulsing this frequency throughout your body. What do you think of that concept?
Well, I'm not familiar with that specific product. I know that this pendant that the Eradicator Technologies produces acts as, I like to consider it like an accelerator to your fountain of energy. So we can gauge folks when they wear this specific product where their bioenergy field, or their aura, you might call it that as well, is maybe, if they're feeling ill, it might be 6 to 8 inches in front of them, where we start detecting some of those negative or higher resonated frequencies. If they're healthy, it might be out, a couple feet, 3 feet. You put that pendant on, it's out 25 to 30 feet. So in this case, so there are tools out there, and this is the one I know of, I'm not familiar with that one, that certainly act as an accelerator or multiplier. And again, what makes this company's stuff unique that I haven't seen anyplace else is that if you are elevated, it'll ground you or bring you back into the target frequency. There may be other things as well. Yeah. We have found things that certainly do the harmonizing, where there's maybe a phone shell or guard or a chip or something. But we've also seen those same things 6 months later, where now they've gotten dirty and now they're producing and transmitting the frequency that they were supposed to protect you from. So, that's one of the first questions you ask any solution provider. How long does it last? If it gets dirty, how do I clean it? How do I find out if it's working?
Where do you see things going in the world in the next 10 or 20 years in terms of EMF and the technology to either harmonize them or otherwise? Or do you see the technology industry moving forward toward more harmonious products?
Yeah, we're at a pivot point at this time, and it's not a pretty place as far as the potential futures. Right now, we have very powerful interests and very significant industries that are pushing along to increase our sources of power, rightfully so, because they recognize the demand. So they're just following economic principles. The challenge is that some of the solutions that they need to put in place are primarily reflect that what they've done in the past have been not so great. And that exposes them to potential liabilities. And so not only is there a cost associated with potential changes in technology that only legislation will bring about, and that will only occur when people get involved to really raise their voice, but that there's this additional liability. Well, will wind power, for example, become, or EMFs in general, the cell towers, all these towers, will they become the asbestos and the lead, of 2030 and 2040? Will we wake up and see that what we've done to ourselves for the convenience and the ability to change our lives with this great technology, have we hurt ourselves so tremendously that we will have wondered why we even did it? So, it's not that long ago where you had 20,000 doctors swearing that smoking cigarettes was healthy, especially for pregnant women. Right. Even though at the same time they were doing that, there was extensive research going back 20 to 30 years before that the stuff was terrible. So we've got that as a barrier to the technology, because the technology is going full steam. When some of the voices that said, slow down, do more research, don't create harm 5 years ago in the cell phone industry and in the area of evaluating these standards of EMF, especially on cell phones, another 2 billion people have picked up cell phones in the last 5 years. So, it is going to be a big challenge, but it's the only way that we'll be able to live in harmony with the technology that we need to be able to maintain our level of lifestyle, especially all the millions and millions of people around the world who want to improve their lifestyle. With these resources, we certainly need more renewable, and those have got to be bulletproof. They cannot create harm in the process of help. A few people cannot be harmed, a few thousand or 100,000 to help a few 100 million. I mean, we've got to find solutions, and I believe we will find them.
Yeah, I think a starting point to that too is if you've purchased a cell phone in the last year or so, they've been forced to put a disclaimer now in the back of the instruction manual that says distance from your body, and it talks about there may be potential harm. It's more of a legal disclaimer for the cell phone companies, but those were not present before when they first started selling them.
Well, certainly there's awareness where some of the industries are brought kicking and screaming, but they will be brought.
Yes.
If people stand up. And on the flip side, those who are on the protest end or those who are on that we got to change have to recognize that it's not an all or nothing option. The folks in the anti-wind industry, for example, because I know this, I've been doing a lot of work in this area, their only solution is to take those things down. Mm-hmm. And the answer is no. The answer is no. We've got to find a solution. We need the power that those bring. So take them down, put them in somebody else's backyard is like shielding your energy and sending it over to the neighbors. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. Yeah. All of us are benefiting from the power. Why should one group pay the price for it? So we need to find the solution so nobody has to pay the price. But for those of us who are protesting and demanding change, our change has got to also reflect the reality. Because unless we want to give up that which we get from those same sources that we're protesting against, we're really just a paper tiger.
Mm-hmm. This may be an off-the-wall question, but I've seen some research done in Russia and Ukraine with pyramids. They built fiberglass pyramids, and they found that the pyramid shape seems to create an electromagnetic effect, such that storms that go through the area will go around the pyramid. They won't cross over the top of it. And if they put salt in the center of the pyramid and for a period of time, and then they have sent that salt off to local penitentiaries, and all of a sudden the crime rate goes down in the penitentiaries. So that shape seems to create some sort of a mitigating or harmonizing effect. Have you done any research in that area? Familiar with that or anything?
With regards to pyramids, I personally don't have any specific background, or I haven't done any research there. Dr. Kyle, before she became a doctor, she was in a PhD program at the University of Chicago, and she was studying ancient Egyptian healing arts. Mm. And you had asked earlier what some of her inventions have been. So she has developed one of about 6 things that are very, very promising and interesting. She's developed a process called brain detox, and she's coming out with her first book this year with that. And it combines the ancient healing arts of the ancient Egyptians, which includes the understanding that she gained when she studied these healing rooms or centers which were inside pyramids. And so from that ancient knowledge, she had to learn, for example, 7 different ancient and dead languages to do that research back in the day, coupled with current brain science, the latest in brain science, and so that she created this specific process. So I'm pleased to be able to report that we've got some association there, maybe not quite in this specific application, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some benefit that came from and accrued from that geometric structure.
Okay, that about wraps it up. We'll definitely have you back for a part 2 interview. There's too many questions to be asked. But if you want to find AJ Deeds' work along with the work of Dr. Kyle Morgan, it's mylovingworks.com and solutions to help with your body, heart, mind, and spirit. Thanks for showing up, AJ.
Well, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure being here, and I look forward to talking with folks here in October.
The contents of this interview, or from Awake and Empowered Expo LLC from Ethan Fox and Flower of Life Center for Human Evolution, is for informational purposes only and does not necessarily reflect the viewpoints held by these organizations or individuals. Always consult with your doctor or health professional before making any changes to your diet, lifestyle, or prescription drug use. Please understand that you assume all responsibility and risk for the use or misuse of this information.